my throat. How dare you?
Good evening, welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. Tonight there are two topics together. One, discussing why you feel like you do if you're recently out of a relationship with one of these creatures, to hopefully give you some understanding as far as why you're feeling so strange. Because you can think about it on the surface and think, well, this was a fake person, why would I even care? But there's more to it than that, which we'll get into. In the second part, explaining what it means when you hear that the narcissistic cluster-B creature cannot self-reflect. Your relationship with your creature's over. You see it now and how phony the creature was, and it makes you kind of angry at yourself for thinking, why do I care about such a person who obviously didn't care about me? Well, there are many reasons for this, and I'll be discussing a few of them. This comes down to a matter of time and priority. These are basic rules that most of us live by. Our time's valuable. We only have so much of it. We like to devote it towards the best things available to us. So in combination with that fact, there's priority. You probably have a ranking system. At the very bottom of the list would be a bus driver, a store clerk. A little bit higher up on the list may be a teacher or a boss, and then you move up to like a close friend would be someone you have at a higher rank that you speak with and interact with more than the others below it. And then higher up on the rank would be like family. Those two could be intertwined, best friend and family. At the very top of the list would be love interest. Typically that's the best friend with a little added bonus, which involves romantic behaviors. You typically wouldn't indulge in those in someone at the bottom of this rank, but at the very top, yes. When we put this in combination with the time, most people would choose to spend a majority of their time with the higher ranking members. The others, in some cases, are just transactional, like a clerk at the store that you can't help but interact with. But in our lives, we typically will spend the time with the most important people, and when it comes to a love interest, that's someone could be the highest on the list. We usually are more intimate with them, physically as well as emotionally. If we're a real person and we're meeting another supposed real person, we'll tell them things about ourselves. In fact, one of the parts of love that's important is there's a risk involved. You will tell them things about yourself that may not be so perfect. If they stick around, that's kind of like a test. It's like, well, they must like me because I told them that I had that acne problem and they don't seem to mind. Ooh. When we're with this love interest, it's like better than a best friend in many cases. We'll spend all this time devoted with them, get to know them, at least we think we get to know them really well. We also share ourselves with them and feel that they know us. When you eventually get through this situation with one of these creatures, think back to the things they did and revisit many of the scenes that you went through where you thought something was fishy and you even brought it up and you were told that's foolish. Now you look back and you can think, I was right about that. I knew he was looking at her and had something going on behind my back, and he had said he hadn't and went to all that trouble to deny it. I found out, and you become angry. But the point is, their behaviors paint them into an image of like an enemy, someone who hates you based on how they betrayed you, pretended to be your best friend just to do whatever they did secretly, tried to ruin you. That's not something a friend would do, so it's very difficult for our brains to formulate this all together because we're witnessing and experiencing hateful enemy behaviors, but at the same time, it's the person that we have at the top of the list that we were intimate with and shared our innermost secrets with, and it feels like a raping of sorts because you've let it all out to explain who you are and what you're all about, only to be treated horrifically by a creature that isn't even human. So our brain has trouble processing that. It's like elements of different things together in one person, and that's just not the way it's supposed to be. We don't want to accept this in many cases. We try to fix it, do something different to make it like it used to be, but we need to realize that that really nice person at the beginning who went out of its way to do anything and everything you wanted was fake. It was like a bait to get you reeled in, and you got reeled in, I'm imagining, and then these horrific things just occurred over time, and then you're left complete opposite. These creatures are extremists. They start off, if there's a scale from A to Z, A is really great, Z is really awful. Well, they start in at A, and then they leave you at Z, and it's just too much for us to comprehend. It can create complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Others may not understand it, but if they haven't been through it, that's understandable. Also, within this situation, you've spent all that time with the person. It becomes usually a part of your everyday life. You expect to see a phone call every morning or a message, and you expect to talk to the person, and then all of a sudden it's just yanked out of your life, and it's very strange. because most things like that in real life with real people would happen gradually. Perhaps you meet a person, you spend some time with them, you enjoy it, and you wanted to see them again, and you do. Slowly, your time increases with them, and eventually you'll realize, wow, I really like being with this person a lot, and you develop it slowly. Well, these creatures usually smash on in and immediately are in love with you the first date in many cases, and that's difficult to accept as well for us, because if we question it, it's kind of like insulting ourselves, like, well, is there something wrong with me that would make me think someone wouldn't fall in love in 1 minute? Well, yes, there is something wrong with that, but it's kind of hard to argue because you're arguing against yourself if you say, I don't think you really feel that way about me. They'll think, well, what's wrong with you? Do you think you have a problem? And then you tell yourself, oh, well, maybe this person just falls faster than I do. I shouldn't judge the person. After all, they gave me a nice gift. Oh, well, I'll see how this works. And that's the trick they use. And they use it on everybody. And it works. And we're in a tough position because we can try to argue it and say, I don't think this is real. There's no way you fell in love after one date. And they'll just say, oh, yes, I did. And you can't really disprove it until the end. And then when it's all over, you can look back at it all and say, I knew something was fishy. And that person let me go into that trap. Oh, and you'll become angry and furious. And you'll be tempted to reach out to the new supply, which is not advisable. Because, as I've stated before, you've already been painted as the picture of the crazy, possessive, evil ex. So if you try to speak to that person, they'll probably immediately just shut the door on you. These creatures are experienced. They've done this for years, decades sometimes. They've mastered the art of deception, and they use it on the rest of us. In the second part, the narcissistic cluster-B creature cannot self-reflect. What does that mean? Well, most of us can, for example, try something new. Maybe there's some sport or some activity. We try it, and we do horrible at it, and we see that we do horrible. We can look at the situation and say, I guess this wasn't such a good idea. I'm no good at this. Or, if you do it, and it's really good, you can also say, wow, I had no idea I had it in me. I can do this wonderfully. I'm going to keep doing more. Well, the second part there is more like the narcissistic creature. Whether or not it's true, they'll think that they're good at everything. Self-reflection is a very important part of our lives. It's also important for us to fail sometimes. That teaches us lessons. But these creatures will hear nothing of that. They think that they always have to win, and they always have to be right. I've talked to a few of them before, and I've said things like, it's no fun to always be right, because if you're always right, you never learn anything. Because if you mess up, you learn something, and you move on. But they won't allow that. Even if they do mess up, they'll just pretend like they didn't.
Oh, I messed up. Oh, because I wasn't trying.
Could be an excuse given. A funny thing happened with one of these creatures that I was dealing with that perfectly illustrates the inability to self-reflect, as well as kind of makes a joke out of it all. And if this person was able to self-reflect, one might think this person was being brilliant and sharing comedy. But unfortunately, I don't believe that's the case. The situation was, the relationship had ended pretty much, but Hoovers were abound. Plus, I worked with this creature, so I still had to see it on a regular basis. It would go from talking via text regularly and then not for a while, and then come back, and because you know what it was doing, it was pursuing the next source or sources of supply. But it likes to keep those X's around just in case the new ones don't work. And I'm, of course, not allowed to know any of this. So I'll just think, oh wow, this person's seen the light. Maybe it's realized that there's something wrong with it, and it's going to fix it. Oh wow. No such luck. But I was thinking about something I thought was funny, because I was self-reflecting, so I figured I'd spread it out and see what happens. I'd come up with an idea of people, including myself, sometimes avoid doing something we should be doing by creating excuses for it, giving ourselves justifications not to do whatever it may be. I sent a message, something along the lines of, yeah, it's kind of funny how sometimes we do make excuses for things that we don't really want to do or that we're uncomfortable doing, and it's kind of funny. So, can you name a time that you have made excuses to avoid doing something that you should have done but didn't want to? And I didn't get any answer to that. So I asked it again, and I'd said the same thing. This creature all of a sudden responded and said something like,
I had a headache. I don't want to think about that right now.
So I figured I'd nudge the creature on a little and gave a real example of my own book and say, well, I can recall that I did this at this one point and I said that, so I wouldn't have to do whatever the activity was. It's kind of funny because I should have just done the activity. So tell me about a time you have. And it was saying things like,
Did you not hear? I said I have a headache. You don't even care. All you care about is getting the answer to your question.
and so I would come back saying, it's just a question, just think about it and answer it. Well, then I heard things like,
I told you I have a headache. It hurts my eyes to look at the characters on the screen.
and I was thinking, okay, this is ridiculous. You're texting either way, but now you're acting like, because I'm asking this question, all of a sudden your eyes are aching and you just can't read the characters on the screen, but yet you're typing them? And all this was kept internally. If we were face to face, I'd be saying, look, you're making excuses. The point here, the joke is, this creature right then and there was actually demonstrating what it's like to avoid doing something they should do, which not necessarily should, but they're being asked to do. And yes, actually they should, because if your friend asks you to answer a question, well, you should answer it. Instead of answering it, what did I hear?
Oh, I have a headache. You don't even care. All you care about is your question. Oh, it hurts my eyes to look at the characters on the screen.
And I'm like, okay, you text all day, every day anyway, so what's the difference? If this was a brilliant person, there would have been a
Gotcha.
punchline later saying,
I couldn't think of any examples, so I figured I'd do it right now. Did I do good?
no such thing. This was avoiding self-reflection at all costs and making it out like I was so selfish for not caring about its headache that I dared to ask the question a second time and insist on an answer. I'm thinking, this is disgusting. And I always used to picture these interactions as if I was on a movie screen with this creature and would be thinking about it from the audience's point of view, watching these two characters interact. And at some points I would say things like, if this whole thing we're involved in was a movie, you'd be the bad guy, you'd be the villain. Didn't do any good though, didn't matter. I'm sure the creature thought, you better believe I am, I'm the worst bad guy there is. It's very puzzling that they just cannot self-reflect, they cannot accept failure. Even if they fail, they masquerade it as success. It must be a rotten way to live. Because we know that they're not perfect, but they pretend to be. And when they screw up, they have excuses, they blame someone else. And it would have been a nice thing had this conversation turned into real self-reflection, where it said,
I was just doing that to give you an example because I couldn't think of any.
such a shame.
Oh, dear honey, I am the sexiest and the hottest Narcopath for you. I missed you.
I have some confessions for you.
I understand that when we first started to date, you were freshly out of a divorce and you really believed in one man, one woman forever.
Well, honey, that's foreign to me, but I went along with it and told you.
Oh, your ex was so horrible. I would never do that to you.
Knowing, of course, that when you told me she was seeing somebody else, I was thinking, wow, she was just seeing somebody else? Because typically when I would date, I'd see at least 7 or 8 someone else's. Because I gotta have my supply. If you're busy, for example, one night, I have to have action, which means I can rely on my other 6. But of course I could never tell you this because I have what I wanted. So I had to go with the flow. I had a whole list of tricks that I played with, and you were asking questions about my exes, and I tried to piece it together to fit with your framework. So I told you, oh, my last ex? Oh, I know a rebound. That was 3 months ago. And I talked about another ex, which just so happened to be just about 4 months ago. Even though I told you my real ex was a 6-month-long thing. You were too smart for me. You actually put 2 and 2 together, looked at the calendar, saw logically that there's no way I could have dated each one individually. And when you presented it to me, I just told you,
Oh no, honey, you misunderstood. You're wrong. They were all separate. I only date one at a time.
that you saw through it. The problem was, you kept seeing me, so I figured that you're fair game, and I kept on with you. Hell no, I was never gonna admit that I actually lied. That's just not something I do, because liars are bad people, even though I make my life off of lies. But you didn't need to know any of that. So, when you sat me down and tried to get me to confess, I resisted all the way, because that is what I do. I